yeah, no, I mean, I think we're all repurposing the same old stories and entertainment, and you're just finding ways to subvert it and try to put your own fingerprint on it. But that's actually a good thing for us. I mean, I think that if anything, it validates the mission of the company, which is to create this game that's going to resonate equally in opposite sides of the world. And it's because stories, and really it comes down to human experience, and for all the cultural differences and the contextual differences, human experience is pretty much the same for everybody around the world. We feel the same emotion, so it's just tapping into that. And to me, if it's anything, like you brought up Black Myth, which I really loved playing, but I just felt like they dropped me in. They started using words like Yao Guai or this or that, and without any context, and I just felt like I was drowning immediately. So I kind of, from the narrative. As far as like the gameplay, I wasn't, sure, you can call it God of War or this or that, but I wasn't really thinking that when I was playing. I was just having fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for us, and the way to kind of actually bridge the gap is to just make sure that we're giving the necessary cultural context to everything we're doing for both markets, so that whoever picks it up is able to feel like they're following along. And that's it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I also just that phrase, like, there's nothing new under the sun. I'm a big fan of that. Generally speaking, because it does feel like we're constantly recombining and just retrying things, that then like yeah. Well, and it was also, I think, even in our recent times, not to go too far into the Marvel Rivals, but like Concord launched a few months before that. And everybody was like, well, that's because hero shooters are dead and it's a dead genre and no one will play a hero shooter ever again. And it was like, no, it just wasn't executed or wasn't marketed, or like, we could talk about what the issues were there. It was like Marvel Rivals landed. And I think, to your point, Rob, there's this thing you could do on Steam around a game, and you can see like, hey, when is your peak? When is your peak? When is your drop? And if you see a peak around 9 p.m., Eastern time, that probably means that you're primarily hitting a Western audience. And if you see a peak around 3 a.m., that probably means you're hitting an Eastern audience, generally speaking. And it was interesting because Marvel Rivals and Delta Force came out at the same time, and Delta Force did actually pretty well, did better than I expected it to. Marvel Rivals did way better than I expected it to. But Marvel Rivals also is interesting because it's a Western audience. Like from when you watch the peak numbers, it's played primarily by people in the West. And so that's where a lot of the, you see a higher peak at the 9 p.m. than you do at the 3 a.m. And Delta Force is the other way. You see the peak at 3 a.m. And so interestingly, like Delta Force is almost a Battlefield game, but built for the Eastern audience. And it's funny when I look at it, I see some of that and some of the art and some of the different, like, just stylistic choices. But I played it and it was like, yeah, this isn't bad. It's not, I didn't like the maps a ton. But like overall, I was like, yep, this is feels like a Battlefield game to me, and it just hit a different audience based on marketing and all these different things. And so yeah, it'd be interesting to see one where you just sort of had that flat line or something like that, where it's just like, hey, we're equally hitting, both audiences with this.
I mean, just really quickly, like we expect 70% of our audience is probably going to come from mainland China, right? Like it's just natural by, the pricing differential and by like just the content. But to me, a 3070, even a 2080, like East Asia West, or 80/20 East Asia West, to me is a victory. The more I can push up the ladder number, the more I justify my existence in the industry. So but yeah, we're trying to subvert that. I mean, again, look, only a Black Myth Wukong can get 2.5 million CCUs because the most common language on the platform is now simplified Chinese, right? So I think it's silly for people to like look too much at like the CCUs, but like, and you can define victory however you want, but why not take advantage of both, right?
Yeah.
You can.
One thing I think, as we do go into more of this global world where a significantly larger number of both players and money spent are coming from the non-Western markets, what is the difference you see between the Western and the Eastern player? Like if you were to make generalized, or like, this is stereotypical perhaps, but just like generally, how do you think about appealing to those two audiences? Because I know that there are differences there, even though we all love great games. It does seem like there are differences in what those different spaces gravitate towards. And that's, I think, true. You could probably, again, further subdivide that. But Eastern, Western, like, what do you see as the difference in the player?
Yeah, so I'm going to constrain this narrowly to our product, which is an action role-playing isometric roguelike, right? It's like a Hades, No Rest for the Wicked. There was a study I read at Activision. We did all of our internal studies, and then there's external stuff, but player motivations, right? And in the West, you have a pretty normative, there's like 8, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's like 8 player, there's competition, there's challenge, there's
social,
exploration. Yeah. There's 8 of these things, right? And in the West, there's an even distribution across all of the 8 whatever's. In China, it's like challenge and competition, right? And so interestingly, I still remember like one of my first slides from talking to our lead designer. This is like 2 years ago almost, and I was showing him like difficulty as a like difficulty of our game versus time, right? So I keep talking to my lead producer, our producer, Jiawei, and I'm like, stop making it so China difficult. I call it like China difficulty, right? Like Black Myth Wukong is China difficult, right? Like a lot of Westerners can't get past like the first boss, right? The first major chapter boss, right? Whereas Chinese, I'm sure there's that famous Steve He, if you know him, Steve He, the YouTube speaker, who talks about adding Asian difficulty to video games, right?
Yep.
That's true. Like that is very true. Chinese, Koreans, they like challenge. Westerners have so for example, in our game, like I think about as like the product manager, as it were, like difficulty versus time. Like the first 5 hours of the game, you don't want to be too difficult. You want, like, let's say, the way I think of it is like, 60% of our players should be able to beat the Rainmaker on their first try, right? Turns out from testing, it's pretty hard right now.
It took me 4, I think. It took me 4, and I needed the gun. I used the gun a lot. Actually, I thought the gun was really cool.
You like the gun?
I like the gun.
The gun.
Yeah.
Brief aside here. Saturday, one of our board members, we had his son play, and I'm just a brief aside here. The neuroplasticity of Gen Alpha is like scary. Like we're doomed. I'm a big doomer on the millennials. This kid, in 30 minutes of me and the board member talking, figured out how to parry stun lock the Rainmaker, killed him, got to the second boss, found a bug where you're able to get back out and go to the healing well, and then beat both bosses on his last try. This within 30 minutes of him playing me for the first time. But I think player motivation is the big differentiator. And then there's like 3 major levers we can pull, I believe, for our game that can get this more east or west. And they are our art direction, our audio direction, and our narrative, right? And Clark is responsible for the west for both. And the reason Clark is responsible for them and not me is because my partner very long ago said, when we started, he said, Rob, you are too Chinese. You cannot objectively, I'm paraphrasing, you can't objectively look at your Western player. What Clark and what our marketing manager Chase and what GC2, our business director, represent are our Western players. And so obviously our core development team is almost all Chinese, but Clark's job and Chase's job is to look at our game and say, is this Western enough to be appealing to me? Right. And be objective about that. And then play testing. But for our game, the difficulty is one big difference. And then how we implement and we can go into detail on this as you like, our art direction, our audio direction, and our narrative, which obviously want to go to narrative because we have a director here. But those are the levers that you can find common ground, and you can pull these levers in different. It's not a binary thing. It's coming up with creative. We believe you can come up with creative solutions. There's been this historical belief. There's like kind of a binary of like, okay, it has to be this. I had a friend I met at DICE, wonderful guy who I think Clark's gonna have coffee with, but it was a binary. He was working with Japanese folks. On like a Japanese game and trying to make it appealing to Westerners. There was like a lever you pull between traditional Japanese and whatever modern elements or Western elements you want to put into it. I personally don't believe it's a binary. I think you can find creative solutions on whatever product map you want to visualize. For example, we can go into our art style or whatever, but I think we can discuss at length how you can thread the needle on making things that appeal to both. But that's how I think of it.
Well, I want to actually jump to Clark because, as you were talking, things were coming to mind for me. Avatar, The Last Airbender, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero. There have been things that have come in sort of both directions that have had success. Like Avatar, greatest selling. Oh, Hero's an amazing movie. Avatar is the most profitable movie of all time. And when you look, I think it's, is it above 70s? Like 73% was non-domestic, because usually they just always evaluate those things from a US perspective. It was like, it was huge around the world. It was gigantic, I believe, in China as well. And again, that was like a I think it was like $2.7 billion movie or something like that. So anyway, yeah, Clark, how are you thinking about this? How are you thinking about that difference as you try to figure out the levers and market to the Western and kind of help manage that creatively?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think so. When I first got hired, as Rob has basically said, I basically got hired for like my ignorance of Chinese culture. I was brought in to be the counterweight, and so I think I stepped into an environment where the philosophy was like, we need someone who doesn't know about China, and that if you're too familiar with China, and once you learn about it, then you won't be able to be objective and make something that appeals to the West anymore, which I really kind of disagreed with from the start and still disagree with. I think Chinese stories are amazing. And obviously you just listed off a few. There's more, less commercially successful, but like Days of Being Wild or whatever. Like there's these beautiful movies, and I've always actually kind of loved them. And the difference between the stuff where you're like, oh, that's too Chinese, or like, I love that movie, is really just whether you followed along. That's my perspective. It's like the emotion, the human experience, all of that, it's going to be there one way or the other. It's like, was I able to understand why the characters felt the way they did and why they made the decisions they did. So I really just think that's the job. It's like it's writing a Chinese story. I've done, at this point, insane amount of research into Chinese history and mythology. So you've got these stories and these characters who've resonated with people for thousands of years. And it's just, okay, how do I make sure that resonates with, with an American player? But I don't think that gap is actually that huge. It's just, it's just doing the job of making sure the logic is all there.
Hey, leaders and game devs, if you love what we do here at Building Better Games, imagine what we could create with your support. By joining our Patreon, you help us bring deeper insights, develop better training, and host more expert discussions to level up your leadership and game development skills. Plus, as a patron, you're going to get exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early access to episodes, and a chance to ask your burning questions directly to us. Join now and help us build better games together.
So I want to ask then a question, especially to you, Clark, because one, I hear you basically saying story is story, emotions are emotions. If people can follow something compelling, that they understand it, it can pull them along. And that's why Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was so breakthrough. It wasn't because there was never a good movie before that just did well. No one designed the movie so it would appeal to West. It was like, no, but it is because the way this was written, the movie actually is very little exposition. And in the same way that I just watched like The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, and it's fascinating to see just some of these classic, brilliant movies where they didn't need exposition, where they like you are sort of slowly pulled into this story, and you're 20 minutes or 30 minutes in, you're like, I want to know what happens to these people. And like, so you're hooked, and then you watch all the way through. And while I think as a Westerner watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, whenever that came out so long ago, now you could tell there was like Chinese themes in this, not just like, oh, it was clearly made in China and that sort of thing, but that like some of how they viewed the spiritual realm was different than like a stereotypical Western experience. But that didn't negatively impact how I was relating to, like you said, the emotion. So the counterpoint to this, my counter question then, is like, wait a minute then, if what we need is story that can be followed and we can get hooked on, why is this so rare, and why do some people consider it either impossible or just insanely difficult, not even worth attempting?
Yeah, I mean, I think story is hard. I imagine it's a lot like it's a lot like what musicians go through. Uh, we've all consumed 10 million stories and listened to 10 million songs in our life, but very few people have actually tried to sit down and write a story or a song. And when you do that, you realize like, oh yeah, I have a lot of opinions and I have taste and I can tell you what's good and bad. But like the skill it requires to make good art is, it's tough. It's really tough. So I think, when you get into a commercial environment and there's timelines and there's pressure and, you're trying to make money, then you say, okay, well, I know what I can do well and what I can do fast. And maybe that's catering to this one audience or the other. But I don't think it's like an impossible puzzle to solve. And we've started from the beginning with the idea that like, this is our goal. This is what we're trying to solve. This is the problem. So we've put our time and our resource and our creativity towards it. And so far, I don't see any indication that we're like fighting a losing battle here.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it's just people haven't been trying to solve it really. Like they focused elsewhere. And, if I'm making like a game for a Western audience, even if I wasn't consciously doing that, I just like rapidly sort of pick that audience and go for it. I don't even try. I don't worry about the other thing. And so I don't ever get the success that might come from hitting both.
For sure. Because I mean, I think as any writer will tell you, like you can spend just an unlimited amount of time creating something. But when you need deadlines, right? Because otherwise you're always just, there's always something to fix and whatever. But once you have deadlines, then you kind of have to move out a little bit from that like pure artistic mode and into a more practical mode, and you write with instinct. And your instincts are going to be the things you've grown up with and the things you consume. And yeah, it's just even me jumping from writing screenplays to games. I think a big change I had to realize was like, okay, my instinct is to put all the catharsis into cutscenes. That's where I'm comfortable. Write this from where I control everything, and like I'm in control of the story here, and we're doing it. It's gonna be the way I want it. But then it's at a certain point, I was like, oh no, that's not the job here. The job is to make the gameplay the most important thing. So I'm writing this wrong. But yeah, no, I think when there's deadlines and stand-ups and you're in a business environment, you revert to kind of what you know. And again, we've started this project with the idea of, okay, what we need is this cross-cultural story. It needs to appeal. Yeah, it needs to appeal broadly. And so if your instincts are taking you in a direction that's too heavily weighted one way or the other, then you need to reevaluate.
Yeah.